Briar Rose, Chapter 21. The prince walked along the path of the overgrown forest, the thorns opening before him. On either side of the path, white birch trees gleamed like the souls of the new dead. "I wish you wouldn't say that part," Gemma, Sylvia whispered. "Not on Halloween." "It is as true on Halloween as any other time," Gemma said. "It's not true ever," said Shanna. "Is," Becca said. "Is too." She was dressed like a princess with a crown and scepter, even though Shanna had insisted only kings carry those. "Is not." Shanna was a pirate. Her wicked black shoe-polish mustache shone with perspiration. She was wearing long underwear for the walk between houses. "Is too." Becca turned to Gemma for support. Gemma simply continued the story. Then at last he came to the palace itself. A mist still lay all about the walls and floors, hovering like a last breath on the lips of all the sleepers. She stopped to take a breath. "Not on Halloween, Gemma," Sylvia said, getting up, the handmade tutu of her ballerina costume sticking up at odd angles and making her exit somewhat less dramatic than she had hoped. Shanna followed Sylvia out of the room, pirate sword dragging. The year before, the sword had belonged to Sylvia's king costume, and Shanna had coveted it for 364 days. Now she was annoyed that it banged into her heels when she walked. It was that and the hot underwear rather than the story that were making her cranky. But Becca was only 8 years old. There was no way she could understand. "Go on, Gemma, go on," Becca said. Gemma went on, needing little encouragement where Sleeping Beauty was concerned. Chapter 22. Magda rose early and left the room. Becca heard her go and turn over, falling asleep back at once. Jet lag had overcome her desire to start on the day. By the time she awoke again, the sunlight was streaming into the room, and Magda was sitting in one chair. "I overslept," Becca said apologetically. "You missed breakfast," Magda said, her mouth for once unsmiling. "That's all right." Magda grinned and pointed to the dresser. "I brought up a bun." Becca sat up in bed. "I really don't eat anything." "You will need your strength. We go now to Chelno, and I have been reading about it. Do you want to hear?" "I already read quite enough about it before coming. It was—" Becca hesitated. "It was not a pleasant place. It was worse than Majdanek. There at least some hope was for the strong." Becca grimaced. "I already know." "Then why?" Magda came over to sit on her own bed and stare at Becca. "Then why are you here?" "Because this is where my grandmother's trail seems to begin. I don't know why. Perhaps she lived in one of the nearby towns or in the Lodz ghetto." "The Jewish ghetto," Magda said. "It is written here in the pamphlet that the Nazis rounded up—" "That is the word, yes. Rounded up thousands from Lodz and the little Jewish towns and brought them by cart and by railroad to Chelmno. Maybe your grandmother's family died that way, but she was somehow hidden, undiscovered. It could have happened." "Yes, it could have." "No women have escaped from Chelmno," Becca said. "At least that's what I was told." She shivered. "We do not have to go there. We can go instead to the Białystok forest. It is not for the Polish kings used to go on their hunt. It is still having bison. You know bison?" "Yes." She stopped because Becca stood up abruptly. "You are not interested in forests and bison?" Becca turned. "No." "You are not interested in the hunting places of kings?" "I am sorry, but no." "I am not either, but—" Magda shrugged. "Sometimes it is important for a friend to ask these things." Becca nodded. "I'll be ready shortly." They headed northeast along Route 83, and several small towns later came into the city of Swiesel. There they turned south, crossing over the winding, narrow river, broad and slow-moving. A little further along the flat, unvarying route, they came to a small sign, Chelmno. Ahead was a white church spire. The great day at that very moment decided to shake off its dull coat. The sun shone through the fragments of clouds with such sudden ferocity that as they came into the village, Becca was temporarily blinded. When she could see again, they were almost upon a large wooden wagon with high plank back and sides. She braked quickly, throwing them both forward against the seatbelts. "Oof," Magda said, and followed it with something sharper in Polish. "Horse-drawn wagons," commented Becca. "It's another century here." Magda giggled and smoothed her hair down. "I have seen this in an American movie, going back to the past." The drive through the town, once they got around the wagon, took less than 5 minutes. Chelmno was a mud-colored place, except for the church, which gleamed white and solid and very out of place in the dun village. The houses lining the street were low, some looked rotted through. Then the grayness of the day was reasserted by the overhead clouds, and it was as if the air became the same color as the buildings. Becca turned at the far end of the village and headed back, pulling up to the church. Shutting off the engine, she asked Magda, "What do you think?" "It is a very odd place." "Odd for a Polish village?" "No, it is very Polish, but odd because, to read the pamphlet, it is a place of such horror. Where would you put 300,000 people, even dead?" Becca shuddered at her matter-of-fact tone. "And it is so ordinary, so quiet, so undistinguished." Opening her door, Becca stepped out. She took a deep breath, as if that might bring her some scent of that evil that was 50 years disguised. All she smelt was the horse pulling the cart as it came up even with the car and went past. Magda got out and stood next to her silently. An old woman in a drab proletarian coat reached her knees, walked by across the street. "Ask her," Becca urged Magda. "Ask her." "Ask her what?" "Ask her where was the concentration camp? What happened here? Is there anyone who would know? Would she look at my grandmother's photo? Anything." Magda nodded and ran across the muddy road. When she reached the old woman, she began to speak quickly, gesturing eagerly with her hands. The old woman turned at once to look at Magda, then turned and walked away, head down. After a few more steps, Magda quit following her and walked back over. "Well, you saw she would not speak with me." They looked up and down the road. "There," Becca said. "There are some men. Let's ask them." She pulled Magda along. The small knot of men approached, were in dark clothes, stared at the strangers with sullen eyes. There were 5 of them, 3 smoking cigarettes with such ferocity Becca was sure their mustaches were in danger of going up in flames. Magda began to speak even before they were close. One man growled something that sounded like "brach," and then turned away sharply. His hand suggested they leave. A second suddenly found great interest in his own pockets, searching for what eventually turned out to be a cigarette and matches. The third and fourth merely glared at them, but the fifth, a man no more than 50, wearing a dark cloth cap, spoke volumes with his hands as if he talked rapid Polish. Becca was glad she didn't understand the words. Magda held her own hands up as if to contain the waterfall of words. Finally, without replying, she grabbed Becca and turned her around, shepherding them both back to the car, away from the man whose voice seemed to rise in direct proportion to their escape. "What did he say?" Becca asked, as they were close to the sanctuary of the Fiat. "He said nothing worth the repeat. He said a lot. It was filth. Better not to know." "I must." Becca put her hands on Magda's shoulder and looked directly into her eyes. "I must. He said that nothing happened here and that we should take our Jew questions away, or that nothing would happen again." Magda's shoulders were shaking. It was the old woman who had refused Magda's questions earlier. Magda turned to her, and the old woman spoke quietly, pointing towards the church where, as it happened, a round-faced priest in a black cassock was emerging. Then, ducking her head as if warding off a blow, the old woman scurried beetle-like down the street. "What did she say?" Becca asked. "Why did she point to the church?" "She said the only one who could tell us anything is the priest. He's the only one who will talk to us about these things. She said not to ask the people anything, especially not the men, but the priest, she said, is the one to ask." "Enter the priest," Becca said, right on cue. "Do you think he knows anything? He doesn't look old enough to have been here 50 years ago." "Priests in these little villages know all the secrets," Magda said. "After all, they hear confession." "But I thought," Becca whispered, "I thought confessions were secret." "Secret does not include history," Magda said. She walked up the church path and intercepted the priest, speaking quickly and quietly. "It is okay," the priest said, loud enough for Becca to hear. "I was a year in America, in Boston College. I am speaking English. Please call me Father Stashu. I am Rebecca Berlin, and this is my friend and my translator, Magda Bronsky." Becca called back. "Pardon me if I ask, but Chelmno is not a usual stop for tourists, not even tourists." He looked piercingly at Becca on the Holocaust tours. Irritated, Becca asked more pointedly what she meant. "Do I look Jewish?" Father Stashu smiled. "Not at all, but Americans who find their way to this part of Poland are almost always looking for the monuments. There are no monuments here in Chelmno, and the people do not like to talk about what happened." Father Stashu, Magda said, "I do not wish to be insulting to your intelligence of ours, but 300,000 people died here. How can you not want to talk about it?" The priest's pink cheeks turned even pinker, as if burnished by her remarks. "I did not say, my child, that I would not talk of it. I have made a great study of the evil that happened here, but the people who lived through it do not like to discuss it, especially not to strangers. It is making them uncomfortable." "Uncomfortable," Becca exclaimed. "When I first came here 20 years ago, I thought to make a career in the church. A few years in a little place like this, move on to a larger city, and maybe become bishop. You know, a Polish priest can aspire to greatness in these times." He chuckled, but when they did not join in his little joke, he quickly went on. But I began to learn what happened here 50 years ago. Well, it was only 30 years ago then. I knew I had to stay to help these poor people cleanse their souls, and it became my life's work. How can you cleanse them? Magda began. If they will not talk about it, Becca finished for her. Come, my daughters, walk a bit with me, and I will explain it to you. He led them an arm through each of theirs across the street, stepping over a small ditch filled with muddy water. This, you see, is where the Nazi school teacher and his wife lived. There were Nazis imported here, homesteading, you see. They brought in good party members to colonize and make German this town. They gave it a new name. Kulmhof, Becca whispered. Ah, yes, you have done your homework. There are no Germans here left now, only Poles, but that does not excuse them, my poor people. If you ask them, they will tell you they were as much victims as they were the Jews. But they do not in their very hearts believe that. Only sometimes in the confessional they will cry to me. Only sometimes on their deathbeds will they tell me they fear dying because they will have to confront the souls of those murdered Jews and gypsies and other Poles too, communists and protesters, and a few priests as well. They were walking along the road now, away from the church, and Father Stashu guided them past a dirty barricade, past some broken down stone outbuildings, the whole thing the color of the muddy road. And I say to them, as if they are truly repentant, God will forgive them, and if God forgives them, they will also be forgiven by the souls of the Jews and the gypsies and the communists and the priests. He smiled, but the corner of his mouth turned down instead of up, and his eyes did not look as if they were smiling. You do not sound, forgive me for saying this, Father, terribly convinced, Magda said. Becca bit her lower lip as if what she had been thinking. When I was 23 and coming here for the first time, I was convinced of the truth of what I had just told you. But I have been here now 20 years, and each year I learn more about what happened then. It is hard to keep one's faith with that knowledge, but I try. He stopped and released their arms. This Schloss, for example. Schloss. This is the Schloss. Magda's voice is ridden. Magda, what is it? Becca asked, a sudden chill descending upon her. The sun was completely behind the clouds now, and an ominous rumbling came from the north. Thunder, of course, but somehow also like the sound of trucks over cobbles. A slosh is a castle, Becca, a castle. Becca turned around quickly. The ruined buildings looked more like farm stock barns than anything else. The cobbled stones on the roads were uneven, many of them missing. Castle. It was an old castle once, ruined in World War I, the priest exclaimed, but when it was here that the prisoners were brought, the Nazis said it was for baths, for delousing, but it was only for death. Becca reached out a hand, and Magda took it, steadying her. A castle, she said. Not much of one, really, Father Stashu was saying, not even before the World War I. But Becca did not hear them. She was trying her best to catch her breath, to stop shaking. With Magda's arm around her, she breathed deeply several times. Father Stashu looked at her in alarm. My child. Magda looked up. She is all right, Father. Perhaps we should go back to the car now. Come to the church. I will make us coffee. I have some little cakes. You will be fine. Now you see why I could not leave. There is much here that needs to be atoned for. You feel it too. Downstairs in the church, in the priest's study, they sat and had tea cakes and some of the very strong coffee in the same kind of white ceramic mugs they had drunk from in the Torin Cafe. Father Stashu spoke about spring and summer in the Lublin upland, where he had been born, with its long narrow fields, gentle slopes of hills, winding ravines, old untouched forests. I rarely get there now, he said, but when I do, it renews my soul. This coffee and these cakes have renewed mine, Becca said. Thanks. She was no longer shaking. Did you have family who died at Chelmno then? Father Stashu asked. He took the empty cups from them and put them in a little serving table. Or are you more than a little cyclical? Is that the word? I don't know, Becca said. I came here to find that out. About my family. Father Stashu sat back in his chair. He folded his hands, lacing his fingers artlessly under his chin. The pink spots on his cheeks were pale in the graying light of the room. Where are you staying? In Bidosugu. At the Berta Hotel, Magda said. That is good. I have a friend who is there, Joseph Potoki. He was a partisan in the war. He lives there now, though he could live anywhere in the world like me. He is drawn back by the souls of the dead. If I know much about what happens now in Chelmno, he knows everything about what happened then. But unlike my poor flock, he will tell you anything he feels you need to know. Let me call him. Becca and Magda exchanged quick glances. Tell him we will be at the hotel this evening. After dinner, we will have coffee. Father Stashu smiled, stood and went to the wall where there was an old-fashioned telephone. He dialed the number, turned as he did so to Becca. He is not always at home, but Good. Joseph. The torrent of Polish that followed was incomprehensible to Becca, but Magda followed it closely, nodding in agreement with the things the priest was saying. Before the conversation came to a close with several obvious euphemisms, Magda had whispered, "Good, he can be there." "Joseph will be happy to see you this evening, my children," Father Stashu said after hanging up the phone. "But he is an old man and rather frail, so do not tire him too much." "We won't," Becca promised. "And if you go out of the way, I will show you. You will come to a beautiful part of the Neru River. Even on the great day, it will have its own brightness and in its own peace. That peace is almost a miracle, considering." For a moment he was silent. Then he looked at the ceiling. "I cannot forgive them, you know. I can love them, but I cannot forgive them. But then I do not have to. I am not God." They followed his instructions and came to a place where the river was gentle, glassy and winding patches of trees, the dark trunks thrusting out from the banks. On the other side of the river were more fields, and the town church spired up past a barrier of trees. To their right was a great field, surrounded on 3 sides by trees, on the 4th by the river. Odd stone walls marked out long rectangular building sites. There were no buildings. "Listen," Becca said. Magda listened. "What is it? I hear nothing." "Exactly," Becca said. "Isn't that odd?" The two of them listened for a while to the silence. Then, without speaking, they got back into the car and drove away.